Hello everyone, and welcome to the Cinéaste Cinema Club. I'm your host, Mickey P, 33, and this is a book club for cinephiles where we watch, discuss, and review all things movies. So, if that's something you like to do, this is the show for you. If this is your first time here, let me explain how things go. The show will consist of two segments. In the first part of the show, we do a spoiler-free review where I share my first impressions and overall thoughts and opinions. Then, I let you know whether or not I recommend the film. In part 2, I critique the film by going into the pros and cons in more depth and even talk some spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film, don't worry because you can just watch part 1 and skip to the end of the show to see my final score. I finish the review by sharing my final thoughts and rate the film based off the grading criteria. And each film will be scored out of 10. Alright, let's get started. And as a reminder, the first part of this video is going to be a non-spoiler review of the film. Alright y'all, this is the last horror film review for the spooky season. Thank God. And it's scientifically the scariest horror film of all time. Today's film review is on Sinister. Sinister was released in October of 2012 and was written and directed by an expert in the horror genre, Scott Derrickson. He co-wrote the script with Robert Cargill, who he writes all his films with. Now, before we get on with the review, there's a few things I need to mention. The first being that, a few weeks ago, Forbes released an article on the top 20 scariest films, and Sinister was number 1. They did this by testing the average heart rate of people while they were watching the movies, and they also recorded the highest spike during the movies as well. The second is that during these past 4 weeks, I've reviewed 3 out of the top 4 scariest films, Conjuring being the only one I'm missing out on, so I might review that in the near future. Plus, I'm now a huge fan of James Wan and his films. Plus, I kinda want to get into his horror universe. The last thing is that what I've learned this past month from opening myself up to watching horror films is that there are a lot of good ones, and I've been missing out on some great films. I still don't care for them, but I have an appreciation for them now. I'll definitely be watching all the great horror films that I've missed out on, though I still prefer to watch them with someone in the daytime, with the lights on, and at a low volume. But anyways, back to the review. Sinister is a supernatural horror film produced by Jason Blum and stars Ethan Hawke. The film had a $3 million production budget and made $82.5 million worldwide at the box office. It sits at a 63% critic score and a 61% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Sinister is about a true crime writer, Ellison Oswald, played by Ethan Hawke, who hasn't had a bestseller in a decade. Desperate for a hit, he moves his family into a house where the murder of a family has occurred. Finding snuff films on the families getting murdered, he finds inspiration for his next story and vows to solve the mystery, only to find that the old film footage hints at the presence of a supernatural entity. After watching this film, I know why it's the scariest film of all time, yet how it also just hovers above a 60% viewer score. The film is indeed scary. It uses the atmosphere, like the lighting or lack of it, along with the sound and the score to heighten the intensity of each jump scare. The past films I reviewed, I watched at a 30 to 40% volume, where this one I watch at a 10% and even sometimes no volume. The story is simple and generic. It's a pretty straightforward horror film plot. There's a guy and his family and they move into a haunted house with this supernatural entity and there's some lore. Nothing special, and the scares are all predictable. There's some jump scares, so it's definitely not some revolutionary horror film. I did mention that Derrickson uses the atmosphere to help scare the viewer, but honestly, everything is quite average when it comes to how the film was shot, scored, decorated, etc. I mentioned the use of lack of lighting. Though one may find this as a stylistic choice, I found it uncreative and boring. When you force the viewer to try to see what's happening only to get them with a surprise, it just cheapens the jump scare. Though a positive is that the score and sound editing was pretty decent, and it didn't rely on tricks to scare the audience. I didn't expect anything less from Christopher Young, who has lots of experience working on sound for multiple horror films. This is one of those horror films that I don't really care for because it's just scary for scary's sake, which I get. Some people like that, and I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum. But for me, I realized that I prefer being scared because of a great story and how the film was made, rather than excessive and gratuitous jump scares. Now, I've always found the supernatural terrifying, and this film is no exception. The monster in this film is a demon named Bagul, or Mr. Boogie, who takes children into his realm, and his realm is videos and pictures. Anything having to do with reflections or where things are supposed to be still, and yet they move, it just scares the bejesus out of me. And there's creepy, terrifying children? Oh hell nah. This film had a lot of my natural fears in it, which is what made it even more scarier to me. This film literally, literally, scared the shit out of me. I had to pause in the middle of it and drop the kids off at the pool because my stomach was so tense and upset from how anxious I was from watching the film. Well, it was either that or the 6 tacos I ate beforehand from Taco Bell. Anyways, the monster was terrifying, and I loved how they had the lore to it as well. It helped to make it more believable and like based in reality. There isn't much character development for Ethan Hawke's character in the film, besides him getting more and more insane as the film goes on. He plays the character fairly well, but besides that, there's no one else in the film that's memorable. Overall, this film is a solid staple for a horror film, but nothing exceptional. Now, I'd recommend this film to anyone who loves to be scared by jump scares and just wants to be scared in general. If you want a good scare, but also want a good story, this might not be the film for you. Now, with that being said, if you haven't seen the film yet, but want to know what I graded it, feel free to skip ahead to the end where I share my final thoughts and rate the film. Otherwise, we're moving into the spoiler part of the review. So if you haven't seen the film yet, turn back now. Go check it out, and then come back and watch my spoiler portion of the review. Let's begin. Alright, let's talk about the ending. I didn't care for it overall. As I mentioned earlier, the scares and the plot are predictable, and I knew that when he moved houses that it was part of the pattern and they were in trouble. The only things that I overthought, because I expected more than a basic plot, was I thought that the son was going to be the one to kill the family, only because he had those night terrors, and I thought it had something to do with the ending. But no, it's a simple plot. Creepy daughter is the killer. I also hate how poorly they set up and underutilized characters in the film, like Vincent D'Onofrio's character, who was the professor. He had a very little role. And Deputy so-and-so, like really? He doesn't even get a name? And he's just there to explain to us all this exposition and that the family's gonna die? It's like, come on, I already knew that. The story is so blatantly obvious that that's where it's gonna go. Anyways, let's get on with the grading. Overall, with Sinister, what you see is what you get. A basic story horror film that will scare you with multiple and sometimes unnecessary jump scares, example, at the very end of the film. But I do think it deserves the scariest of all time accolade, but also it deserves the above 60% audience rating. With that being said, here are my final scores for each of the grading criteria. And again, if you haven't noticed, I mentioned last week that I combined a few criteria together and added a few more to make the grading more concise and comprehensive to get all the aspects of the filmmaking process. Let me know if there's anything else that I should be taking into consideration when watching and grading these films. Anyways, my final grade for Sinister is a 6.4 out of 10. Have you seen Sinister? And do you think it's one of the scariest films of all time? How many of the top 20 scariest films have you seen? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. It really means a lot to me. Remember, you can join the Cinéaste Cinema Club and stay up to date with what movies you are watching and reviewing just by following Cinéaste Cinema Club on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Again, there you can suggest and vote on what movies we watch and stay informed with the latest movie news. Reviews will be posted to my YouTube channel every Friday at noon. And every Saturday at noon the next day, on my Twitch channel, I will be hosting a companion show where I bring on a guest and we discuss the film in more depth. We talk spoilers, share our thoughts and opinions, just like my video reviews, but the only difference is that because we do the show live, you, the viewer, can share your thoughts and opinions on the film with us. Also, if you don't have time to join in on the live show, you can listen to the audio-only podcast version on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcast content. Just search Cinéaste Cinema Club. VODs for the live show will also be on my YouTube channel. Again, all social media links are down in the description below. Let me know what you liked or disliked about the show and how I can make it better. If you like the reviews, please share the show with your friends and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to get more movie reviews. Tune in next week for yet another review by me, Mickey P. 33. Peace.